Good morning. What is great, good, and real? And welcome to, I think, day 47 now of the Do You Rules live stream experience. It is Sunday morning. I am in work mode because we are starting our week. Also, because it's about 12 degrees and it's snowing. So, on top of my cardio, I know I got to do some shoveling. Oh, my beautiful people. My beautiful people. We're going to ask the question today about and around what are you convinced of? Have you convinced yourself? And as I speak into this mic, I ask myself that question. What are you convincing yourself of? And why might you be so convinced? Because some days, quite frankly, I'm less convinced than others. And why? Oh, because I experience things the way you do. And sometimes the experiences that I experience don't feel too great. And sometimes I experience things that feel magnanimous. Sometimes I experience things that don't seem to feel at all. You ever think about that? That if we're sort of in this rush to attain and we're improving every day and we want to be successful every day, sometimes you can miss the feeling because you're sort of just convincing yourself about what you need to be doing. Red Book of Abundance. I really hate that blur. Gotta do something about that blur. Gotta do something about this shave that I need. Ooh! What time is it? You damn right it's 4:31 a.m. Hydration system. Chapstick. 1 second. All right. My wonderfully beautiful and blessed people. My wonderfully beautiful and blessed people. I talked about this book yesterday. I also bought 3 books at Target yesterday. I go to Target every week. I knew they had books, but I don't go there for books. So I've never shopped for books because, because I've convinced myself that's not what Target is for. But it's interesting. This book has some depth to it. Read people like a book. It sort of hasn't been what I convinced myself it would be. We're talking about convincing ourselves today. But I was supposed to read something yesterday. At least I convinced myself that I was supposed to read something from it yesterday. But I got really into the conversation I was having with you all and myself yesterday. And so I forgot to read what I wanted to read yesterday. But as I formulate what I believe I'm going to say and what I'm convincing myself of saying today, I think what I have to read from there, not that I have to, what I want to read from there is going to be instrumental to our conversation. So I wrote some things down. Shocker, if you've been with me for day 47 or whatever this is. I thought about today that it's almost day 50, which means it's at least at the halfway mark of what I've convinced myself I will do, which is at least 100 days. And the thought of going 100 days crossed my mind today because it's sort of that middle area. And I think we do this. It's natural. We look for a start, we look for an end, and the middle is usually where it's the most messy. The middle of any journey is the most messy. And here's the reality. All right, my beautiful people, what are we convincing ourselves of? The beginning is usually glorious because it feels magnanimous. When you start something, we can become addicted to starting. That's how great it feels to start because we convince ourselves that there's something we're in search of, and that something we're in search of is all kinds of glorious, all kinds of abundant and blessed, and we feel courageous and determined and energetic and ferocious and godlike, right? As humbly as I can say that. And if you follow me, I just used the word from A to H semi intentionally. Rewind the tape if you want. In any event, we can convince ourselves to start something because it's very easy to convince ourselves to do something we think we need to do because we've convinced ourselves it's something we need to do. So think about a time, anytime where you sort of we're improving together. I'm going to go do this. It feels great. And it feels great because we can see the end of it, and the end of the road. Boys to Men came to my head. Although we walk to the end of the road. It is 4:35 on a Sunday. I've convinced myself that the only way I can do these things is to absolutely let myself go crazy. However, my point, I've convinced when we convince ourselves to start, it's because we can see the ending, and the ending is just as glorious. Imagine that. Imagine that the power of what we're convincing ourselves to do is because the start feels great for all the reasons I've already listed. Usually scares us half to death. But we can see the ending, and we know the ending when we finally conclude is going to feel just as great. But then we get caught somewhere in the middle, and the middle is messy. The middle is very messy. The middle is almost indescribably difficult because in the middle, as I've already referenced, if there's a massive amount of obvious emotion that we can convince us to start, and a massive amount of positive emotion that comes with the conclusion, the start of the race, the end of the race, excuse me. All right. It's the middle. The middle is messy. It's almost like when you're baking something. I was just baking a bunch of cakes recently. It was my wife's birthday. I had to bake, not that I had to. Everybody got a cake. My wife, my son, and my daughter. When you're looking and at least maybe if I could be doing it wrong, but when you're checking to see if the cake is done, typically the edges and everything and the top starts to brown, but you got to stick something in the middle. And you won't know the cake is done until you stick something in the middle, and does it come out what? Looking all messy and gooey and gobbly. That's the middle, right? The middle is all kinds of uncomfortable. It's all kinds of messy and gooky and ugly and difficult for us to convince ourselves to keep going. Otherwise, I'm so sorry. I feel like I'm going to sneeze, but it doesn't want to come out. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Man, I can't even begin to tell you the level of frustration I have with here goes again, man. And that's part of the process. As much as I know this, the more you focus in on an emotion and an experience, the more you reinforce it. But when you got to sneeze and all this stuff is going on, it's hard to it's hard to ignore it, right? It's coming again. My mother. I, I convinced myself to come on every day, not to sneeze myself and blow my nose to death. I really don't. It gets annoying and frustrating. And I ask God to carry me through because I said that this is what I would do. In any event, we're talking about we're asking the question. Have you convinced yourself yet? What have you convinced yourself of? At this juncture, at some point, we reach not a conclusion or the finality, but certainly we conclude that we are something. And we are someone, and we're making use of ourselves. At least I believe we do. I think we do. I hope we do. I hope you do. And and so it begs the question to me, what have we convinced ourselves of? Easy to convince to start, easy to convince where we're going, messy in the middle. We talked about that. I had this dream last night, and all I could see in this dream was sort of a light pushing through to try to force a door open, right? And every time the light would push, it was almost as if it was bouncing between doors, right? And it couldn't find a door to open. And it kept pushing doors, and it kept pushing doors, and it kept pushing doors, and it kept pushing doors. Until, of course, it pushed the door wide open, and boom, this massive rush of light just entered and started to force itself into this room. And at the same time, my alarm clock rang. So it was time for me to get up. But it's almost as if when that occurred, my immediate thought was, what are we opening our doors to? What are we opening our doors to? So if our being, our essence, our consciousness, our image in creator, however you identify, however you choose to convince yourself of what you are being, or any of the identity process, how you identify. I said it good enough. Sometimes I talk myself into thinking I have to continue to explain in greater detail when I don't. You are who you are, right? Cool. If I could look for the symbolism in the light trying to find a way to enter, and the light going from door to door to door to door to door, why wouldn't the light just bust through the first door? Why are there even options? Why are there even different doors? Ultimately, I believe we're one entryway, we're one possibility. There's reciprocity, as I mentioned. That's why the unified process, the harmonious process, the synchronous process of the essence of all, mind, body, spirit, is significant. So in that way, although there are parts and some to the whole, where there are parts that create the sum of the whole, you could argue that maybe there's a light that needs to enter physically, mentally, in mind, body, spirit, right? And that we could also argue that the light ultimately should enter in with consistency. Who you are in mind should be who you are in body, should be who you are in spirit. At least that's what I'm coming to learn. At least that's what I've convinced myself of. Otherwise, how do we create a continuous, harmonious, predictable, and synchronous improvement process to convince ourselves to start, because we're going to convince ourselves we'll make it through to the end, because we have to convince ourselves to get through the messy, which is the middle. And as I'm continuing to learn, explore, and understand, it's almost as if I ask the question, will there ever be a conclusion? Even in death, I am convincing myself to the belief that the life after is more glorious and more harmonious than what this physical reality offers. In fact, based on my prayer, my meditation, my research, my study, there's literature and other folks who have explored this possibility. The Biggie Smalls' Life After Death, I think that's the name of his album. I read something that was profound one day that said this: the other realms of possibility, of elevation, spirituality, let's call it heaven, we have the choice to choose heaven when we're done with this physical reality, but we won't make that choice for ourselves. Imagine this. We won't convince ourselves that that's where we need to go until we've gotten everything we need out of this life, which ultimately equates to that you must leave this world, this physical reality, this experience of life in the highest loving way. That you believe there's nothing else you could do here to convince yourself that there's more love to seek here. And in that way, your light being, your essence, that the isness of all, when you leave here, you can choose to be a light in a higher elevated space, which we could describe as heaven. And in heaven, when you are that light and you are that love and you have that realization and actualization that I've convinced myself that there's no more love to have. I already know what love is. I can demand love by the moment, right? Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Okay. And so, quite frankly, quite frankly, I like and I love that possibility. And I like and I love that possibility for a multitude of reasons. The main one being, as I'm coming to terms with how to define love in my life, and as I continue to convince myself that I am reaching an elevated state of self-love, as I'm convincing myself that I'm going through the improvement process and the grind and I'm staying in the messy middle the entire time, essentially, I can convince myself that there's more love to seek for myself. And I may never actually reach the conclusion of self-love because I don't think it ever ends in that way, right? Imagine that we could leverage to convince ourselves we got to start because we got to reach an end, but we'll never really reach the end. It'll somewhat always feel like in the middle. But in that same way, as we're fighting in the middle, we'll have wins and really we'll have some really big wins and some experiences that are on the highest end of the love spectrum. That it'll feel like something has concluded, but it's just another reminder of the possibility of the massive power of love if you move in the direction of love as consistently as possible. So we convince ourselves ultimately that when I get something that I've convinced myself I'm on this physical journey, I'm on this spiritual journey, I'm on this intellectual journey, I'm on this financial journey, I'm on this relational journey. I reach certain, I guess you could call it pinnacles, peaks. And when I reach that peak, I can identify it and say, wow, great. But I got to, motherfucker, man. Ah, frustrates me. I'm so sorry. Okay. I'm going to sneeze for real. Woo! All right. I think what I was saying was I convinced myself I had to sneeze. It finally came out, and I hope that that's it. Once I've reached some peaks and some vows, and I've had some high end experiences, because in order to convince ourselves to stay in the middle and keep going, we have to have. I talked about this other day, might have been yesterday, day before, I don't know when. The days are beginning to blur as they should. And in that same way, it's funny, they'll tell you when you stay in the state of mediocrity, days blur. But I think when you stay in a and when you can convince yourself to grow every day, that you're maturing every day, that you're evolving every day, that you're grinding every day, that you're winning every day, that you're working every day, the days blur. Anyhow, motive and incentive. If we don't have we I refuse to stop. I don't care what happens. I don't care how it looks. Whatever. I mean, it's funny. I do care because I just think I'm speaking because I am a speaker. I am in the process of attempting to share and influence and encourage and motivate and inspire and show. And an inability to do that in any way, mind, body, and spirit, creates frustration. Creates frustration. So this is why the live stream experience is important. I script and I record. It's easy. I can stop. I can filter. I can edit. I can cut out. But these are the things that we go through. And these are the things that we go through that can convince us, you see, you shouldn't be doing this. Not only are you a fool because it's this early in the morning on a Sunday and no one really cares, and there's more important things to do, like go shovel the driveway, but you can't even stay on the mic long enough to get your point across because you're blowing your brains out the side of your face, right? But whatever. I've convinced myself that not only can I do it, but I'm doing it. So incentive, motive. If we don't have incentive or motive, we're not going to have the incentive to create a plan. We won't be able to convince ourselves to continue to go, right? So the light, what are you opening your doors to? What are you opening your doors to? And I believe that that's symbolism for also what are you convincing yourself of? Who have you convinced yourself that you are? And then as important, can you convince yourself otherwise? Should you convince yourself otherwise? Have you considered that you could even convince yourself otherwise? Where are you in the conviction in your conviction? And of course, I would argue if you're closed off in your conviction, then there's nowhere else for you to go. I, we could, of course, you could go somewhere else. You could pivot. But if you're convinced already that there's nothing else, I don't like to fight those battles. And I struggle sometimes with delivering that message because then I say, well, what are you trying to do then, Jeff? I just don't understand how to rationalize and reason logically, because I believe it's all logic based, which also is faith based. You already have the faith to believe you're convicted. I don't know that I'm going to waste cycles trying to convince you. I'll tell you like this, right? Leadership 101. And when I'm mentoring people who are going into management, one of the first things I tell them is this story, is this analogy, right? If you are a leader and you are the captain of a boat, let's presume it's a rowboat, and you're just on the front of the ship and you're looking out with your binoculars and on this boat, and you are responsible for getting the boat where it needs to go. And you have a team of 20 people. And on this rowboat, 10 of these people on the left, 10 of these people on the right, and you're telling these people where they need to go, right? 19 people are going in the direction, and let's just say they're paddling forward and doing what they need to do to get the boat to move, and one person is paddling in the opposite direction. You got 20 people, 19 are going straight and they're paddling forward. The other one is paddling backwards. Who do you focus on? Ironically, emotionally, and maybe this is somewhat of a trick question, we believe we have to get that one person to figure out and learn and understand, yo, what are you doing? There's 19 people going straight. You're going backwards. What are you doing? Do you not see what's going on? And so naturally, you're going to want to say, I got to put my energy, my effort, and my focus to get this one person to do what I need them to do, because I need them to go where I need them to go, because the other 19 people already got it. The other 19 people, they're efficient, they're effective, they're fluid, they're moving, they're good. They need no more oversight. So I'm going to take the attention and effort I have, the energy I have, the wisdom I have, the knowledge I have, the force, my leadership skills, I'm going to put it on this one person. And here's what the logic actually tells you. Here's what the logic tells you, and here's why I believe a lot of people struggle in leadership and they miss this. If you have but so many cycles, you only have 100% of you. I'll give 120, you got 100, all right? 120 is out of 200 if you do math right. You can't take more out of what's there. It doesn't mean you got to go harder and you got to be yes, you go at 100. Okay? I digress for the sake of, I don't want to demean any of the message. You want to try to give 120? Go ahead. I would argue that those who give 100 every day get a lot further than those who try to find 120. You got 100. Give it. So I'm going to take this 100 that I got, this energy I got, this force I got, this love I got, this power I have, and I have 1 out of 20 going the wrong way. I got 19 out of 20 going the right way. And I'm going to take all that attention and put it on that one person. To do what? To convince them to go where the other 19 are going? To burn that energy to convince this person that it should be flagrantly obvious. My G, you're going in the wrong direction. Not only are we going in the wrong direction, you're stopping everybody else from going. You're making it harder on the other 19 of us. What are you doing? So now go through that process of having to convince 1 out of 20 that they're ruining it for the other 19, that we won't get where we need to go because of you. How don't you see that? So this is what I do. That 1 out of 20, you get off the boat. I kick you right off the boat. I don't care if I have a lifeline, like a life vest or whatever, I'll give it to you. But if I don't, I don't. I hope you know how to swim. I hope you know how to swim, because I'm not going to take my attention and my energy on 1 out of 20. What's the math on that? 0.5%? I got 99% going the right way, and I'm going to take my energy and focus on the one person. No. You go. You got to go. So in that way, and this, I'll get back to the power, but in that way, I'm not here to convince anybody who's already convinced that I say, yo, we got to go forward in order to win, and you decide to go back. Or I know because I've taken this road, we got to go to the left. You decide you want to go to the right. I'm not here to convince you. And if anything, I encourage you, go the way you think you need to go. You've already convinced yourself. And so since you've convinced yourself, I really do believe that free will, if you haven't learned to be mature enough about your decision-making processes, or that we would be having a conversation because I'm in a position to provide assistance, that's another thing. Particularly in my role, in my leadership roles, right? How I hire, how I fire, how I build teams. My role is to provide, Jesus, man. Fuck. I apologize for the frustration. I really do. But this is a live experience. I'm in my position of authority because I'm being paid to be in this position of authority, or you're paying me to be in this position of authority. I will not take your money to try to coddle you and convince you and put you in a warm blanket and put you back on your mother's nipple to get you to do what you're supposed to do for you. I am just a remembrance and a reminder of what you already need to know. In fact, I want to work with you so you can get away from me as quickly as possible, because I want you to be self-sustaining, self-sufficient, and fluid in your mind, body, and spirit, that you're convinced already of where you need to go and how you need to do it. And so in that way, I'm not going to try to convince you. I'm not gonna try to convince you to what should be obvious. How about that? So I just went raw, right? Like fuck it, whatever. So my point being, imagine that you've decided, yo, I gotta make some improvements, and then you have to be convinced to make the improvements. I'm not wasting my time. Not doing that. So we start to ask some of the questions, right? What are you opening your doors to? What are you allowing into your energy force field in your space? What are you allowing to be convinced of? What is convincing you? Of course, then it leads me to the question of, are you convincing yourself? Have you come to the conscious realization of who is in control over the conviction of your life? Why are you so convinced in what you're convinced on? Why are you so convinced in what you know? And why are you so convinced in what you know, not just externally, not just in the world and in all the relational aspects that allow you to feel like you're making a contribution to self? And I'm not demeaning it, because I constantly come back to the realization that we have to be seen in order to know that we're here and that we have an opportunity. If we're not seen, then how can we know we have an opportunity, right? So fine. I think in this space, we get caught up a lot in the esoteric and the external view on how we shouldn't be influenced by it. But how else do you make a contribution? I don't. We gotta be able to have that realization and understanding too. It's funny when we convince the world that we're making positive impact to the world and we're rewarded for it. That's okay. That's okay. But when we're influenced by the world and the materialism and the propagandas and the conditioning, that's clearly not good. But I would argue, if you've convinced yourself that that what the world is selling you, you want to buy it. Who am I? It goes back to that same concept of the boat. You want to row in the opposite direction? I'm not judging you. I'm just saying you can't be on my boat because I'm moving in a direction. That's how communities are built. That's how groups are built. That's how we become in strength in numbers, because the people have to believe in a direction. However, in the same way, how could I know that the direction I'm going makes sense if somebody's not going in the opposite direction? If for nothing else, then for them to reinforce I'm going the right way. However, don't be naive and ignorant. You're also convincing them that the direction they're going is the right way. That's why I don't fight you. That's why I don't fight you. You tell me there's a certain way I want to operate, Jeff. These are my non-negotiables. I've convinced myself. Cool. I'm not going to convince you otherwise. But I can be a light to reinforce. Yeah, you see, I see how Jeff does it. I don't want to do it that way. It reinforces what I do. Cool. Whatever you open your door to, what I'm saying is the conviction you have, is it finite? Has it concluded? Is it the end for you? Is there nothing else left to be convinced on? And if you are in the process of trying to convince yourself otherwise, how are you doing that? What sort of light are you allowing to enter into your door, into your domain? Right? Our mind, body, and spirit, it's our domain. It's how we quantify and qualify existence. So fundamentally, what have you convinced yourself of? And can you convince yourself otherwise? Then you start to ask the question, how do I convince myself? Well, you got to make progress in the direction you're looking to go, which means you have to know what direction you're going in. I know where I'm at. I know where I want to go. The middle's messy. We talked about that. But how do you even get to the middle? Imagine that most of us don't even get in the middle. The middle is so messy. That cake is so undone when you stick the toothpick or the butter knife in, and it comes out so gooey and sloppy and disgusting. We don't want to be there. We want to be the crisp edges. And that's where we live. Think about that. We live around the edges, which is misleading. It looks like it's done, but in the center, it's real soft. There's no substance. There's no substance. We're not fully baked. I would argue also continually that you should never be convinced that there's no more, that there's no other room, that there's no more room to go and grow. Which then might make you ask, does the cake ever get fully baked? Yes. And when it does, you start baking another cake. What are you opening your doors to? What is your level of conviction? And if you've made a pivot, are you convinced yet about who you could be? Okay, my amazingly, wonderfully blessed people. What are you convinced of today in your life? And if you convince yourself otherwise and you've decided to improve and you're on this journey and you're on this path and you're making these commitments and you're grinding and it's gritty and it's cold and it's dark and it's lonely and you feel unsupported, you feel like you're walking that tightrope and all you can see around you are the depths of despair that are actually welcoming you. Just let go. Just jump off. It's like Jesus in the desert. It feels like that analogy, right? The devil tempts him 3 times. Maybe it feels like you're fasting. You're fasting from your previous life. That was one of the temptations. And you want and the food of comfort or the comfort of food that was your previous you that has convinced you already, if you just come back, just chew on this, take this pill, you'll be all right. There's also the temptation of just give up, just fall off. God will save you because you believe so deeply. Release the pressure from your own hands, fall into the hands of God, which is again that comfort, convincing yourself that there's nowhere else to go. So you got to jump off. You got to give up. Then there's also the conviction of, fine, if you but submit in a way that would give you all this authority, all this power, perceptually, no one really knows the dirty, dark details. No one knows the gritty and the grind. No one knows what you go through in the dark. No one knows when you've cried yourself to sleep or you've cried yourself awake or you've cried yourself through pain. No one even knows that you cry. I can give you the crown, make it look real pretty, make it look real nice. I can give you that perceptual ambiance and visual that will suggest to the world, look, this person, they're elevated. If you but follow the conditioning, the programming, and the ease of how to convince others that you've convinced yourself. And left with those options, which are always prevalent, which are always available, which are always profound in that it offers you some closure, at least from the perspective of, I can be convinced that this is a way. I can go, it's ironic. You're on the boat. You're rowing in the opposite direction. Sometimes the person rowing in the opposite direction might know something somebody else doesn't know. So have you convinced yourself that there's something about you that you don't know yet, that if you could just discover, that if you could just work on, that if you could just allow the light to burst through, would change everything? Which then asks, or begs the question to ask, what is a changed everything? What could you convince yourself of? What could we convince ourselves of that would not force the euphoria of the immediacy and the instancy of just considering the start? Because we can see and be convinced of what it would be if we could finish. How do we convince ourselves to go through the messy middle? To have faith in the center, to be the center, because all that there really is for us is the center. The universe beckons, responds, reacts, and convinces you of what you convince it. What are you convinced of? What do you need to be convinced of? Change your mind, change your life. I am who I say I am. Do you and stay rich.